Well, hello everybody, welcome to Talk to the Doctor. My name's Eddie. Something a wee bit different today. A wee while ago I did a book called Face to Face. In that book we spoke to the great and the good of Doctor Who in the classic series. So we're going to do a wee bit of that today and in the coming weeks on Talk to the Doctor. Today we're going to speak to the man responsible for the McCoy era of Doctor Who. So please welcome Andrew Cartmel. Hello Andrew.
Hi, I'm not sure I like the word responsible.
Well, you know, I think there's been a great renaissance in the McCoy era. I don't remember, I'm a massive fan of McCoy in his era, you know, and, you know, I even like Time in the Rani, you know.
We have to agree to disagree on that.
Yeah, I remember when we spoke before, you told me that if you had a chance again, you'd have took your name off Time in the Rani, you know, so I know you're not a massive fan of it.
With hindsight, that would have been the smart thing to do.
Mm-hmm. So how did you end up on Doctor Who? What was it? I know you probably talked this to death, but how did you end up getting Doctor Who?
I had been writing scripts for television for some years with a bit of success. I'd sold some scripts that had been optioned but not made, and I'd got an agent, crucially, as a result of it. My agent was mates with John Nathan Turner, who was then the producer of Doctor Who.
How was John? I've heard various rumours that he was brilliant and mad and hard to work with and great to work with, all kind of mixed together.
Those are all true. It depends on when you got him. He was basically a very nice man. He drank too much. He was under a lot of pressure, and he could be quite bad-tempered at times. However, he would take pains not to be bad-tempered if he sort of valued you, I think. And also, he cheered up, because once we got into it, certainly by the second year on the show, although there was still a lot of pressure, he got the sense that we were doing good work together. So that helped enormously.
You could definitely see that. And I know from, you know, discussing with people in the past and looking at the history, a bit of a Whovian historian, as it were, you know, it was quite high pressure. He was looking to move on, but was getting a kind of gun at his head to remain with Doctor Who for a while. Would that be correct?
He wanted to move on and he didn't want to move on. He couldn't quite let go. He was offered opportunities to do other shows and turned them down. It was a very hard horse to get off Doctor Who, I'd put it like that.
So when you take over, I know it's kind of, the series is kind of, season 24 is kind of half begun. You know, where did you jump onto that? Was it right at the start? Did you have a say in McCoy? You know, what happens with that?
When I joined, there was no Doctor and there was no script save for a single first episode of what would later become Time in the Rani, and at that point was still called, I believe, Strange Matter by Pip and Jane Baker.
And how was that? I know you've discussed that.
I think it was terrible and it got worse. Well, I wanted to know, it didn't get worse, it just remained terrible.
And what about Pip and Jane? How were they to work with?
They were a complete nightmare to work with. They just wanted to not listen to me or do anything I suggested. They felt they were pros who'd been in the field for decades, which was true, and they felt that I was a complete newbie, which was true, and that I didn't know anything, which was completely untrue. If they'd listened to me or just let me rewrite the script, we could have had a much better story than Time in the Rani.
I see good things in it. I quite like Sylvester in it. I think he's good in it.
Look, Eddie, the cast is great, and I love Jeff's designs. Jeff Powell's designs are magnificent in it, and there's some good costume design. All of which, though, is in service of a terribly weak and I think feeble, cliched, uninteresting script. I think, in my personal opinion.
So talk me through, you know, you're a new script editor, you come into Doctor Who, which is a massive high-profile TV show. You know,
no, not really. It was a much hated and reviled and a show that was past its glory days, and people were ashamed of it and embarrassed about it. I mean, it is all the things that you said now, but at the time it was an embarrassment to the BBC. They just wanted to be shut of it.
I know that Michael Grade, etc., had kind of put it opposite Coronation Street as well, which doesn't help, when it goes against a behemoth like
No,
Coronation Street.
and although it made sense in a way that, in the sense that there's always an irreducible minimum of very devoted Doctor Who fans who would watch it, even against Coronation Street. So it made some kind of warped sense. Also, you have to remember Grade hated it, but then there were things to object to in some of that era of Doctor Who. So it's not like he was entirely just a pantomime villain who was trying to destroy the show we loved. Although I suppose he was that too.
So the things about Doctor Who that was worth criticising, you were aware of them and then set out to change that. Would that be fair? Did you have your own version?
I wasn't aware of anything about Doctor Who except, really the Daleks I'd seen, and the TARDIS, and I'd sort of been peripherally aware of the Hartnell series when I was very young, and that had lodged in my brain. I'd seen some episodes. It was very impressively creepy, black and white science fiction stories, which I loved. So I had that sort of impression. I suppose I might have had some notion about Tom Baker because he was a very popular and high-profile Doctor, or maybe even Pertwee motoring around, but I'd never watched any of their episodes. So I knew nothing about the details of the show, although I knew a lot about its essence.
Do you think that's a good thing? I mean, there's an argument for like Chris Chibnall being the showrunner at the moment. Effectively, you and John Nathan Turner, between you, were the showrunner at the programme. And one of Chris's kind of problems, or one of the things that he's criticised for, is being known too much about the show, and being too in depth. Would that be something that, with you coming with a fresh eye, is a bit like Philip Hinchcliffe did? With a fresh eye, gives you a kind of better perspective.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is possible to know too much about the show, especially about the sort of canonical fine print. I think that's one of the things that went wrong with Moffat, who's an incredibly adroit writer and was capable under Russell's aegis of writing some of the finest episodes, I think, but left to his own devices, he just got mired in the kind of fan service detail, I think.
Yeah, I understand. I've heard that a lot. I'm quite a fan of Moffat, and particularly Capaldi's era, Moffat and Matt Smith. But Capaldi, I understand.
I think, a tremendously underrated Doctor. I think that he got the short end of the stick because he wasn't as well served by the scripts as some of the previous incumbents, which is a shame because he was. There's nothing wrong with him as a Doctor. It's just he didn't really have the material.
I always felt he was a Doctor at a time as well, ironically for the Doctor, because a Doctor of that age kind of bracket would have worked brilliantly. And
it was great. No, it was great. I mean, he was returning to that kind of thing of, the more like the Troughton Hartnell kind of Doctor.
He certainly had the trousers for it, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So what about yourself?
I'm sorry, your sound dropped out completely there.
Sorry, you had so you have carte blanche to do what you like with Doctor Who. Would that be fair, or did John?
No, I think John was open to me experimenting and trying new things, but he was very, very concerned, especially when the writers I hired didn't immediately hit bullseyes all the time swiftly, but once we started to make some progress, like we got Stephen Wyatt's Paradise Towers underway, and that proved to be a relatively smooth and easy process, then his confidence in me began to grow, and I began moving towards the point where I had carte blanche. I don't think I ever entirely had that, although by the final season that we worked on together, he was very content to give me a great deal of freedom. And actually, as long as I avoided making stupid mistakes, I suppose I did have carte blanche.
There was previously when we spoke, we talked about Paradise Towers and Happiness Patrol, and one of the things that you'd said about both of those was that there was a kind of not a fight, but a kind of there was always kickback from the production side of things. Your vision and the writer's vision wasn't always what showed up on screen. Would that be a fair comment?
Well, that's true. I think of every Doctor Who story ever made, perhaps less so now, and they've got more effective CGI and special effects. But back in those days, it was always the biggest gamble when you tried to do anything ambitious or interesting, like with anything alien or science fictional. they're on historical stories. You're always on more solid ground because the BBC did a great job of evoking various historical periods. But if you try to, other planets or alien technology or anything like that, sometimes you get something brilliant. I mean, look at Raymond Cusick's design for the Daleks. It's stunning. It's a design classic, which they should stop trying to mess with because it was, perfect. On the other hand, you could get some real garbage. And that was down not just to budget, it was down to the vision of the people who worked on the show. Because one of the odd things about the BBC was people were sort of rotated into employment on particular programs according to a schedule, rather than getting the people who were so you could have a situation where people who were dying to work on Doctor Who weren't allowed to because of the strictures of the timetable, and people who hated Doctor Who with a passion were forced to work on it, which wasn't great. So what I'm saying is that you didn't always have the best people to serve that particular program.
So you've done season 24. It's been relatively successful. You can see the ratings were they held their own against Coronation Street. I think that's fair to say.
I never paid much. Well, John certainly paid a great deal of attention to the ratings, Eddie, but I never did. I just wanted, if I was just happy with what went out, that was the main thing, because you just can't control the ratings. It's all kinds of factors could influence that, and also we were in the doldrums. People just didn't really want to watch Doctor Who. The big mistake rating-wise was leading with Time and the Rani, because you had a new Doctor, you were coming back after a period of being away. It's a chance to make a big splash, and leading with a story as diabolically bad as that just shot us in the foot. So that was the biggest mistake that we made rating-wise.
Is that why on season 25, when you start again and you've got, you start that from, you're on a running start, then you really, really hit the floor running with Remembrance of the Daleks. It's still to this day, top 3 Doctor Who episodes of all time.
I agree. I think it's a masterpiece. John's decision to lead with that story was, I imagine, just down to the Presence of the Daleks to start with a bang, but it didn't hurt. And I think John did appreciate that it was an exceptionally well-written story.
I mean, I think it's lightning in a bottle, isn't it? Because Sophie comes in to replace Bonnie. The relationship between her and Sylv is extraordinary.
It's great. It's a whole new dynamic, isn't it? I mean, she's a completely different kind of companion, really well brought to life by Sophie, and a great chemistry between those two figures. Sorry, I just had an email come in. It always sounds so unprofessional, doesn't it? I'll turn them off now. Sorry, Eddie. So what I was saying about Sophie, there's this great chemistry and camaraderie between Sylv and Sophie. I don't know, you probably know this, they actually have the same birthday. So they are interestingly compatible, and that was wonderful. So we had 2 great characters, 2 terrific actors, and they got along, because that's not always a given, is it? You never know.
Absolutely. I mean, Remembrance has got lots of things. I mean, the supporting cast is brilliant. The set, as you were saying, the BBC does period really well, so that 60s set is extraordinary.
Yeah, but
everything
also
about it.
The bridge of the Dalek spaceship is really great, which is mostly created through the use of darkness and some neon tubing. It's a really interesting and superb piece of design on a low budget. I just think it was really, really great.
And
of course, it almost didn't happen because they couldn't find the plugs to plug in the neon. So they were going to go without it, and the designer said, "No, I'll stand in the middle of the set, and you'll have to try and shoot it with me there unless we find the plugs." So they found the plugs. Right. That just goes to show, even when you have a superb piece of design by somebody who really cares, there's still all these factors operating against us, chiefly factors of time and money.
And it's got to be, I mean, I know that it's probably Ben's book more than anything else that kind of, the novelization of Remembrance of the Daleks has spun off everything since, hasn't it? The New Adventures, the Time War, everything has come from that novelization. I don't think he gets the credit he deserves for that.
Well, it's really well written. He took it in an environment where the general wisdom was that you just would take the money and run for doing a novelization. Ben regarded it as a chance to practice his craft writing prose, And he just did an exceptional job. I remember him handing his stuff to me to read, and I was very, very pleased with it. I think it's outstanding.
There's a deleted scene that everyone knows about when the Doctor is confronting Davros at the end, and Davros says, "You're nothing but another Time Lord," and he says, "Oh no, I am much more than another Time Lord." And that there is the kernel of the Cartmel master plan, isn't it? That's the first firing shots of that.
Yeah, exactly. And the master plan simply being to reinvest the Doctor with some stature and mystery.
What do you think of where Chibnall has taken that? Do you know?
I only know about it because what people sort of told me, because I haven't seen any of Chibnall's stuff, but I haven't singled him out for that honor. I've seen very little of the New Who. I mean, I wish everybody well, and I know it's a terrific show, but it's like, unless I'm working on it, it's not my kind of show, if I can put it like that. It's not a show I'd follow avidly unless there's a chance of being involved in it again. Because I didn't watch Doctor Who, and then I got a job working on it for 3 years, and I did the best work I possibly could, and worked with some fabulous writers. But when it ended for me, I stopped watching Doctor Who again. Of course, when it ended, there was no Doctor Who to watch for virtually 2 decades. And I did tune in when it came back. And I must say, even before the first show broadcast, when I heard that Russell had cast Billy Piper, I thought he really knew what he was doing.
Definitely. I mean, that season 1, or series 1 as they call it now, is extraordinary. I mean, you haven't stopped with Doctor Who, didn't you? I mean, I'm jumping ahead slightly, but I mean, you wrote The Cat's Cradle and War Child, and you know. And
yeah, I kept being employed, you know, and I'm very grateful to that. You know, writing Doctor Who in comic book form or prose form on audio adventures, all of which was great, but none of which compelled me to see any of the new stuff, because I was writing about Doctors I already knew. Mostly about Sylvester and Sophie, but I wrote about Peter Davison's Doctor, number 5, and I did a Troughton story at one point. But all of that stuff was available to me, and I was aware of some of the Golden Age material. I just didn't, feel committed to watching it after it came back. I sort of noted, I never thought it was going to come back, but when it did, and it was a huge success, I felt, in a sense, vindicated. I was occasionally pissed off about things. So, for instance, when they did the Dalek story, and the Daleks mounted the stairs, and everybody attributed that to them, and it was Ben who did that, I did get a bit territorial and annoyed about that.
Yeah. Season 25 itself, obviously, it was the 25th anniversary of Doctor Who then as well. You know, was that? Were you aware of that? Was that something that you
oh yeah, John totally went for it. I mean, he wanted the Cybermen because they were notionally silver, you know, silver anniversary. But yeah, John wanted to make a big thing of it, and he wanted to cover the Radio Times, and we didn't get one, did we? So
no,
as far no, so which was just shows what contempt the show was held in by the BBC at that time.
Normally be a special as well, wouldn't there? There'd normally be like a multi-Doctor story for an anniversary as well, but
the fact that didn't happen doesn't terribly sadden me, because I feel those things are quite unwieldy.
The hard work. According to every writer I spoke to about them, said they're a nightmare. I spoke to Terence Dix years and years ago, and he said, "Oh, you know, not for him."
But if we had done one, I would have lobbied to get Ben to write it, because if anybody could come up with an interesting angle on that, it would have been Ben at the time.
Definitely. The season 26, if we jump onto there, that really is, I've always said this, and I'm a great advocate of it, it's almost a proto-new series, prototype, if you know what I mean. The stories are a lot deeper and a lot more adult. I
do feel that there's a direct line between Survival and Rose. It really is just, it's like a more ambitious extension of what Rona Munro was doing there with, you know, the council, the state environment, contrasted with these scary science fiction stories. I mean, I'm just getting quite excited thinking about Rona and her writing. I really am very proud of what we did. And I worked with stupendous writers, Eddie. I really did. Rona's, I went to see her adaptation of Frankenstein in the King's Theatre last year. When theatres were open, it was extraordinary. I saw it in Richmond, Eddie. Yeah, as well, you'll know it's an amazing piece of work. It's great stuff. So happy. She's also written for the new series. She wrote for Capaldi's Doctor. Yeah, she wrote The Eaters of Light, correct? That's right. So she's
she's, I think, the only one to have done that.
Yeah, and more power to Stephen Moffat for being so perceptive as to get a great writer of her standard back on the show. I'm so pleased. I just wish that they could have got Mark Platt and Ian Briggs, to name a couple more.
Yeah. Well, Mark and Ian and Ben were all part of your kind of, the Fab Four, if you like, the kind of the molded Doctor Who. Would that be right? You were the
I would have said that they were the inner circle, because Mark came on board with a deep love and familiarity with the show, and Ben came on board with a less thorough acquaintance, but rapidly made up for that because he researched voraciously, watching tapes, reading scripts, and so between the two of them, they knew as much about the show as anybody. But they had this additional thing that they were really good writers who could turn their imaginations to writing not the sort of Doctor Who that they'd seen growing up, but to write a new offshoot of the show, which is what we were doing with Sylvester.
You can definitely see that in like Ghostlight and the Curse of Fenric.
Ghostlight. As soon as you say the title, I just think it's wild. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was the last one shot, obviously, but it came second.
Such a great show. I mean, Fenric's really good too, but the thing about Fenric is huge and ambitious and it's widescreen, but I love Ghostlight because it's like a chamber piece. It's like this beautiful jeweled miniature, like some kind of Victorian toy, and it's just perfect. It's so witty and dark, and it's got that crazy Lewis Carroll thing. And Mark's dialogue is so great. Yeah, so Mark, I mean, we're working with lots of talented writers like Stephen Wyatt and Ian Briggs and Rona Munro, but, and God bless him, Graham Curry, but the guys who really knew about the show and so who I could turn to whenever we were doing something where we were sort of tinkering in the engine room, so to speak, dealing with, issues from the history of the show, then I would turn to Mark and Ben.
So tell me about season 27, the one that didn't happen.
There wasn't that much to it. We discussed bringing on a new companion and the scene that we would introduce her in, and we talked about writing Sophie out, writing Ace out, and giving her a wonderful exit by sending her to Gallifrey to become a Time Lord / Lady herself. So there was sort of that, and we had, more than having scripts, we had writers that I wanted to use. People like Tony Etchells, Robin Mukherjee, for instance. And it didn't happen. As you might have noticed, it did not happen. So we didn't go, and we weren't commissioning scripts, and we didn't have any money, and we learned quite early on. I mean, I learned in time to write that farewell monologue at the end of Survival, which I had to drop in because Rona wasn't around. At that point, we knew the show wasn't coming back immediately. We knew there was going to be at least some kind of hiatus. So there would not have been much time spent preparing season 27, because by the time we finished season 26, it was all over.
When I, with regards to that, with our wolves out there with the sky is burning, that soliloquy that you wrote for Sylvester, when I interviewed Sophie a way back for my book, again, another plug for that book. So when I interviewed Sophie, it was on a Skype call, and when we discussed that, the two of us, verbatim said it, and it was a thrill to hear Sophie all saying that, the words to that, because she'd remembered it.
Got a lovely voice too. I mean, she's done loads of voiceover work because she's so well equipped.
Yeah, absolutely. So with regards to season 26 as well, did you feel, because you were saying it was kind of disregarded and kind of the embarrassing kind of uncle in the cupboard kind of thing? Could you do what you like with it? Did you not have any? There were no notes. Did you just walk up? I'm just going to do that.
There was one famous occasion when I was up in the with John, seeing Mark Shivas, who was head of the department at that time, whose job it was to watch each episode to make sure we didn't defame the royal family or something. And he took a long phone call during what I thought was one of the most important sequences of Remembrance of the Daleks, the bit where Ace discovers that there's this horrible racist sign hanging in the window of this boarding house run by this lovely old lady. Classic Ben kind of gambit. And he didn't watch it, like he was busy on the phone. So when he came back, I scolded him into rewinding and watching it, and he was not pleased. But all of which is to say, it was a struggle to get anybody to watch it. So yes, once John approved something, there really wasn't anywhere else. There was certainly no compliance or any of that draconian Orwellian nonsense back in those days. So we just had to be sensible and not kind of uh, arouse any sleeping dogs, and we would be fine. Yeah, we were left alone. That was you're very perceptive, Eddie, because that's the upside of being unwanted, is that you're also unmonitored.
I mean, I think it's, as I said earlier, it's a bit like lightning in a bottle, isn't it? You've got you, and you've got Mark who knows the thing. You've got Ben who's really keen in the learning. You that's got that kind of, you kind of just got it quite quickly and knew where you wanted to go with it. And then you've got the fact that nobody's looking at you. You know, so it gives you the scope to write things like Remember to the Daleks and Ghostlight that might not have got done in like normal Doctor Who, if you like.
Well, normal Doctor Who had fallen into a strange kind of doldrums, I feel. But, you know, that was partly because John had stayed on too long, partly because the character of Colin Baker's Doctor had been very poorly conceived. They just never knew where to go with that. And I think the rot set in with Peter Davison, who's a tremendous actor, but I've said this before, but he was too normal. He was like this handsome young leading man, you know, looks like he's about to play cricket. You don't want that. You want Alien, you know? And Tom Baker had delivered Alien in spades. And that was one reason John was fairly sick of Tom Baker and his eccentricities, wanted something much more normal and mundane and down to earth, but that's a mistake in Doctor Who. And it's not a mistake for John to have made, because he was the man who always talked about the quality of being doctorish. He'd say, oh, that's doctorish, or that isn't doctorish enough. So he did get it. But I think he was always just too inclined for everybody to be sort of lovely and handsome and nice. And then occasionally he would do something really dark and nasty to balance that. And that wouldn't work either, because it just didn't feel like Doctor Who. In some sense, he didn't really get the format. I know it's an extraordinary thing to say for a guy who presided over it for such a huge length of time. But on the other hand, he did get the format, because once we started going in that direction with Sylvester, he totally embraced it. I do think that for years, the show had gone off into some strange kind of tangent, and it didn't have the essential weirdness, the eccentricity that I think is so valuable to Doctor Who and is, you know, something to treasure. It had that British eccentricity combined with a kind of Gothic science fiction strangeness, which was uniquely appealing.
Absolutely. There's, I mean, as I say, I do a lot of reading on Doctor Who. Is it true that John was the person who would kind of push the light entertainment button quite a bit? People like Ken Dodd and maybe even Nicholas Parsons coming into
John's great pleasure in life was casting stars in the show. And John himself came from a sort of light entertainment world. Like as you know, he directed Panthers and stuff. So he was totally up for getting people like that in. I mean, he'd get people like Dolores Gray and Stubby Kaye, whom I didn't know from Adam. I didn't know who they were until years afterwards, but these were gods of musical theater, for instance. So it was like, and he loved this. And yes, so it did, I suppose just the casting could pull it in the light entertainment direction, particularly, as you say, in Delta and the Bannerman. But with Ken Dodd, but it didn't necessarily have to go that way. So, for instance, Nicholas Parsons did a very good job of playing straight as the vicar in Fenric. So that cast, it didn't inexorably or inevitably send us in the light entertainment direction, but there was always that worry because, you know, John was a big camp man, and often the show got quite camp.
I think it's known for being camp. I think the minute Pertwee put on that smoking jacket, it became a different program altogether.
It also has a kind of Victorian, gentleman adventure, boys' own comic kind of thing going on, which is not entirely the same thing. And again, is a very valid approach to that kind of show. It's more like H.G. Wells and Conan Doyle. I would have argued.
Yeah, Matt Smith was very Victorian in the way he dressed. Particularly at the end, he had that long jacket and a waistcoat, bow tie. It was proper Doctor, if you know what I mean. He went
Victorian Edwardian would be an ideal period. That period that sort of spanned by writers from Bram Stoker to H.G. Wells. Yeah. This was the great age of British science fantasy, I would have said. And so anything that looks back to that is a very, very valid approach to doing Who. But it hadn't really been doing that. It just been sort of all over the place for quite some number of years, I'd say.
Would Sylvester have made it out of season 27? Were you thinking of recasting the Doctor at any point?
Well, we were thinking of keeping Sylvester for 27 and recasting the companion. That's normally the way it would have done. And I probably would have argued for Sylvester to do another season, because it's not unheard for doctors to do 5 seasons, is it?
No,
So,
absolutely not.
especially when he's 6. But that would have depended a lot on if lightning had struck again, if we'd managed to get another companion who worked with him as effectively as Sophie did as Ace. So, I mean, we're just fantasizing here, aren't we, about what might have happened? But if we had got a companion who was equally great, then it would have reinvigorated the show. And I think, Sylvester would have begun to probably want more money and want more, perhaps, creative control. But he had quite a lot of that already. Not the money, the creative control.
No, he's talked about the money before.
Yeah, but on the other hand, it is the gift that keeps on giving. He's still doing conventions all over the world, or he will be.
Finished all the time. Yeah, absolutely.
But so I mean, there would have been the standard things that you get when the star has been on a show for quite a while. He would have begun to flex his muscles, but that is not by any means a bad thing. So I could quite happily have done a couple more seasons with Sylvester, especially if I had moved. I would have loved to have moved up from being a script editor to being a producer, which is something which, quite naturally, it was a quite natural career path, but it sort of begun to cease to be that around about the time that I joined the BBC. The old ways of doing things were falling aside, and they weren't being replaced by anything much better, it has to be said. Yeah,
it was lots of production companies, wasn't it, that started coming in the early 90s. The Kudos and people like that were all starting to take over the drama.
It was no longer purely in-house. There were these sort of co-production things, which can be good or couldn't be bad. I mean, the BBC, when I joined, was making fabulous stuff like Edge of Darkness and The Singing Detective. But I do feel that those remained the high watermark for some considerable time onwards, maybe a decade.
Would you have ever cast a female Doctor?
No, it would. To be honest, it never would have crossed my mind. That's something that became. No, that's not entirely true, because the old thing about will it be a woman? I think that even arose when we were casting Sylve, because it had been around forever. But I don't think it was anything that we had, besides being a sort of good tabloid headline. I don't think it's something that we would have seriously entertained at that time. But when they cast Jodie, I remember thinking I'd seen her in Venus, which is this Hanif Kureishi movie with Peter O'Toole. I thought she was stunningly good in that. So I thought they were onto a winner there. And it's perfectly fine to cast the Doctor as anything you like. I did feel, though, that for Chibnall to do that as soon as he joined the show, it seemed a bit like he was throwing the kitchen sink at it. I felt it's like a jazz theme that you play it straight and then you play a variation. So I would have thought it would be good to keep Capaldi or let Chris make his mark on Standard Who and then go in this direction. I thought that would have been more interesting. However, there was a feeling that the show was very much hemorrhaging viewers and that they had to do something big, bring it back with a bang. So it makes sense from that point of view.
Fortunately, now it is hemorrhaging viewers. It's I think it lost something like 46% of its original viewers from Chibnall's first one to his latest one. So it's going downhill rapidly just now.
Oh, that's really a shame, because there's so many talented people involved. I don't think Chris Chibnall can write science fiction. I've got to say, for a man who's worked so much on Doctor Who and Torchwood, his Torchwoods were uniformly terrible. And I say this knowing full well that he writes crime really well. I mean, I thought Broadchurch was masterful. I thought that his work for Ashes to Ashes, or was it Life on Mars, and indeed Law and Order, were all first rate, but he just had no feel, and I think probably still has no feel for science fiction, despite being a huge Doctor Who fan. So I was never entirely convinced that he was the best choice. I think the ideal choice for showrunning Doctor Who would be an unholy union of Russell and Stephen, because together those two have all the skills that you need, but they're probably both too big. Their egos are probably too big to share. So it's just a fantasy that anybody could do it in partnership. But if you wanted to come up with the ideal showrunning team from the recent years, that would be it. It would be some kind of balance of them.
Well, if you and Ben aren't busy at any point, if you ever want to.
Well, Ben actually when the show came back, Ben pitched me an amazing story. It was just so great. I thought, wow, they should make that. But the thing is, and I'd love to work on it, and Ben would love to work on it too. Although in Ben's case, he's so busy, it would be difficult. Like seriously, he's presiding over an incredibly successful franchise with his Rivers of London. So it would be a matter, and he's not the world's fastest writer. He is one of the best in the world, but not one of the fastest. So it would be a dream to get a script out of him. But I'd love to work on the show because I would do what I did before and get a whole bunch of new writers. Plus, I'd be in a position where I could bring back some of the greats like Mark Platt. Like why they sort of did that half-hearted adaptation of Mark's Cybermen story, Spare Parts, instead of just getting Mark in to do it himself and doing something great. I thought it was shameful, and I thought it was a shoddy way to treat such a wonderful writer. And I just don't know why they did that. It was really.
I said the same with Human Nature, Paul Cornell's Human Nature. I thought, don't get me wrong, the version that they did on the telly is really, really good, but it's quite different from Paul's. And it would, and Paul gets writing credit on it, but I agree with you about Spare Parts. When it became was it Age of Steel, and he got a writing credit, but an idea by
buried in the crawl at the end, Eddie. It was really, and he was shamefully underpaid. It was just like, why treat a writer so badly? I just never understood that. And writers were treated very badly under people like Chibnall and indeed under Russell. I just don't understand, because they're writers themselves. Why? I honor and revere the craft of writing. I would not treat writers in that way. So I've got no idea where their heads were at. But I do think that it's a shameful mark to their discredit.
Absolutely. And you almost wrote for Torchwood, would that be right? I think I read somewhere you get commissioned to do Torchwood, but then they changed the format of it.
It's funny you should say it. You read my mind, Eddie, because I was exactly thinking about that. I rang up Russell because a mate of mine is Stephen Volk, he's a very famous writer. He did Ghostwatch, and he wrote the Ken Russell book, and he did a series called Afterlife. Anyway, so he's a top writer. And they approached Steve to work on Torchwood, and Steve was too busy, but he spoke to me and said, well, why don't you approach them? So I rang up Russell. Russell couldn't have been nicer. He was very open, and that very rapidly I got commissioned on Torchwood. But before I could write my script, I had to have a meeting with Chris Chibnall, and Chibnall just put me off and put me off and put me off. And like this was, how I earn a living. I had to write this script, and it would have paid me money. It would have got me back into television. It would have been a good credit. There would have been, if there was any justice, if I'd done a great job, there might be more Torchwood. But Russell brought me into the fold, but Chibnall was in charge of scripts, and Chibnall just would not meet with me, and he just wouldn't. And this, they kept booking meetings, and they never happened, with no real explanation. And then finally, after months and months of this, Chibnall just left. So he effectively prevented me writing for the show. And that's what I meant when I said I would never have treated a writer like that. Or if I had, I would have had the balls to say to their face why I was doing it and what they were doing. So, it was reprehensible and invidious behavior. But it was, hey, it's television. So what do you expect?
So after Doctor Who then, what was next for you? You wrote some new adventures. How were they to write? Did you? And I saw the guide, the Virgin Guide. In fact, I've got it in the next room. The Virgin Guide that they sent out to everyone. Were you kind of stuck with the cat's cradle idea for Star Wars?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the initial offer was that you would write longer, not the novels would be longer. There'd be more adult in content, and there'd be a free hand. They weren't based on scripts, and that the writer would have quite a degree of freedom. What you didn't get was a decent payday. So I turned it down, but they came back with an improved offer, and they offered to pay me more and all the other writers more, which was great. So that was one good thing. But then almost immediately they began rowing back on what they were giving us, because they suddenly they got cold feet, and they thought, we're doing this series of books, and the best way to get them to sell is to somehow link them together in groups of 3 with some really stupid encumbering continuity, which I did my best to ignore. But it pissed me off, because already they've begun to erode the notion that you could write a standalone Doctor Who novel. And to be honest, even if they had kept that promise, I would still have been frustrated, because I didn't really want to write Doctor Who. I wanted to write my own completely original novel. So there was always that tension there. I don't know if I wrote an effective Doctor Who novel, or a trilogy in that case. But I do know that people love them. I mean, Russell would often say how much he liked some of those novels. So they did hit the spot. I will say that I was heavily influenced by the cyberpunk of William Gibson, which Ben Aronovich had introduced me to when I was writing this book. So they are very dark and dystopian, and perhaps not as much fun as they should be. I certainly wouldn't write anything that dark and gloomy now. But, you know, they're an accurate portrait of my times and my state of mind when I was sitting down to write a bunch of... And also, I didn't know how to write a novel. I was just learning on the job, for which I'm very grateful to Virgin for, that they paid for me to learn the craft of writing, or at least to begin to learn the craft of writing, which is the classic example of learning through doing. You get better at writing by doing writing.
And talking about that, now you've got, as I was looking through your body of work, the Vinyl Detector, you've got about, what, 6, 7 of those books out?
I wish it was 7. I will show you the latest one. You can't. There's no way on earth you can stop me doing this, I'm afraid, Eddie.
No, go for it. Go for
this
it.
is number 5.
5.
No, but it's funny you should say 7, because I'm working on not just one, but 2 more, which are sort of linked. So 7 is the current goal in mind.
Tell me about the Vinyl Detector then. What are those about?
You'll never guess, Eddie. It's about a record collector turned sleuth and his fun adventures in... often the story, but not always, revolves around the search for a rare record. It goes through the... I was going to say that it involves the world of record collecting, but it only sort of briefly does that. It involves the larger world of music and band. So, for instance, in the one about psychedelic music, we encounter a sort of Pink Floyd type band from the 60s, except it's a female heavy band rather than a male heavy band called Valerian. So, in fact, I've just got the Czech Republic translation of that book back, and it's called, on the cover, it's called Something Valerian. I couldn't tell you what it is because I haven't Googled the Czech yet. But yeah, so for instance, you get embroiled in the world of musicians from different periods and bands and this sort of music scene. Like the one I just showed you is set amongst people who were in the punk heyday, who had a punk band. So we dig down into those worlds. So it's often about the music and the music makers of their time, as well as my passionate love for vinyl, which ultimately is just passionate love for music, because what that's all about, in case anybody's wondering why anybody would go to the trouble of listening to vinyl when there's other easier ways of listening, it's because it sounds better. It sounds more like really having that musician play the music for you live, and there's nothing better for that if it's a piece of music you love.
Well, you're talking to a man of a certain age with 2 guitars over his shoulder, so...
They're very lovely. I did notice them, man.
That one there is, my wife just got me that at Christmas, that one. So that's my new one. It's a beautiful guitar. I've taken up an awful lot of your time. I really appreciate you coming. Where can we get the Vinyl Detector then? Amazon, I'm assuming? Yeah,
they're available everywhere. There are audiobooks and there are ebooks. And when libraries are open, there'll even be library books you can borrow. And you can dip in, just grab whichever one comes up, because you don't have to read them in sequence by any means. And I think, and I do believe that if you read one, you'll find yourself falling in love with the characters and want to read more, because I've fallen in love with the characters, and I hope that shows. And they're a lot of fun. The books are thrilling and scary and bloody and suspenseful and mysterious, but they're also kind of really quite sweet and pleasant too, in the sense that there's always a kind of a central core of characters who care about each other, for a bunch of friends, and also a couple of cats. So if you're dog lovers, be warned.
Well, and obviously the Script Doctor, your book about your time on Doctor Who, is that still available?
Yes, I'm just reaching for a copy now. This has just been reprinted, limited edition reprint, and it's selling very fast. So if you want to pick one up, do pick one up. Again, if you're short of money, you might well be able to find a copy in a library somewhere to read when libraries come back. There is no ebook or audiobook yet, although we do have sinister schemes for both of those things.
Well, I have the old one, the original version, and Mother, and a well-thumbed poem.
Reynolds, well, you need an update because there's 32 pages more color pictures in the new one.
Well, I'll need to buy another one then. That's what I'll do. That's my next job. I'll buy a Vinyl Detector and a Script Doctor as soon as
that would be incredibly kind of you. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
No worries at all. Andrew, thanks very much again. I do appreciate your kindness for coming on and speaking to me. You're always keen to talk, and it's
Take care.
really
Thanks
good
a
to
lot.
speak to you and catch up. Take care, mate. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.